Hey, welcome back, YouTube. Welcome to my channel where I share ideas, lessons, and tools on how to become the best versions of ourselves. Today, I want to share with you the 4 books that have been very influential in my life. The authors are actually quite diverse. 2 of them are Stoic philosophers. One of them is the Roman emperor. Another one is the advisor to an emperor. And a third one is a mid-century poet, and the final one is a contemporary Zen monk. They span about 2,000 years apart. And before I start, you might have noticed that I am not in my room. So I'm actually on a 3-day solo out here in the wilderness, and just to get away from civilization for a bit to read, write, reflect, and I decided to take you guys with me on this trip. Around me is this beautiful meadow with the sun actually just setting. And there's a little bit of glare, so I apologize for that. But without further ado, let's get started. So the first one on the list is Seneca, Letters from a Stoic. And Seneca lived around the time of Christ. And this book is a series of letters that he was writing to his friend Lucius during some troubled times during exile and beyond. And from this particular book, I learned about restlessness and how that I should be extending my stay amongst writers whose genius is unquestionable. This speaks to how in today's world there's almost an obsession with reading a ton of books, right? There's tons of YouTube videos about, how I read 52 books in a year or how to read like 2 books in a week. And this actually goes to the opposite of that, where he says, if you travel a lot, if someone who travels a lot everywhere doesn't really have a home, right? And has a lot of acquaintances, but never really deep friendships. So in the same way, I try to extend my stay amongst authors who I really like and whose genius is unquestionable, right? So all 4 of these authors I'm talking about today definitely make the cut. And that's really shaped actually how I see books and authors in general too. So to me, really good authors are, when I get really deep into the text and the content, they almost become my council of advisors, right? I almost picture like a council of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Thich Nhat Hanh, and Rilke for any of my inquiries about life, be it professional or personal or anything, even spiritual, right? So they serve as guides and dear friends to me. And from Seneca, I also learned the joy of teaching. So one of his letters says, "Part of my joy in learning is that it puts me in a position to teach. Nothing, however outstanding and however helpful, will ever give me any pleasure if the knowledge is to be my own benefit alone." And similarly, there is no enjoying the possession of anything valuable unless one has someone to share it with. So for me, learning and knowledge and experiences are much more enjoyable when I'm able to share them with others, be it friends, my partner, or even with you on YouTube, right? And I think there is something to be said about that. People also learn as they teach as well. I mean, we're all on this journey of life together, right? And finally, I learned something about friendship. Seneca says, "To procure friendship only for the better and not for worse is to rob all of its dignity." So I feel like, in a lot of ways, people think of friendships as people just hang out with or have fun or, grab a beer with after work, right? And when the time comes for like help, or if you need a shoulder to cry on or people to pick you up, like, from a downfall, that's when true friendships or true friends emerge. So in the same way, the way that I try to show up for my friends is to be there for both, the good, joyous parts to bear witness to that, but also be there when they need me the most in terms of when they fall, right? Because that's the only way really to dignify a friendship. And the next one on the list is Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. So Marcus Aurelius is actually my favorite Stoic philosopher. I was introduced to him first And he was the last great Roman emperor. Rome as an empire actually started in decline after his son Commodus took over. This was actually pulled straight from his journals. And these are his reflections both during Rome as well as on the Eastern Front when he was facing the Germanic barbarians at war. In fact, he actually died basically at the war front. In many ways, this was his attempt to try to make sense of the world as well as understand himself. And from Aurelius, I gained the citadel of the mind, which really speaks to how, the greatest retreat is actually within ourselves, in our own mind, right? We could be assaulted by a variety of stresses from work, from life, from, even getting to a car accident or whatever it is like that life circumstances throw at us. We are still in control of our own judgment of those perceptions, of those stresses, of those stimulus. At whatever moment that we choose, we're able to retreat into that, right? Refresh ourselves, remind ourselves of the things that really mattered the most, and then go back into the world refreshed. So I think this part has been really important in so many facets of my life, especially during high stress environments, and even during COVID, actually. So I had moved back with my parents just to make sure that they are okay and, to take care of things around the house during the pandemic, during the early couple weeks. And there were times where I didn't leave the house for 3 weeks at a time. And that was actually okay for me. Because I knew that I could always retreat back into my own mind, essentially. I could be productive, I could think about things, I could write. I didn't need to be at a mountaintop. I didn't need to be at the beach. I didn't need to be even in a forest, in a gorgeous forest like this, in order to refresh myself and feel like, my life is still in control, because ultimately I am in control of the judgment and the perceptions the world throws at me. And also from meditations, I learned that, true beauty, or, our true mission in life is quite independent and very internal. So praise has no part in that, right? Something that is truly beautiful does not need to be praised by external sources. Everything should and could essentially come from within. And one of the other really important lessons that I learned from meditations was about the nature of things. Marcus Aurelius says, it would be foolish to think that a fig tree will bear anything other than a fig, that a ship's captain should be surprised that the ocean is turbulent, or a doctor be surprised that a patient is sick, right? So in a way, understanding the true nature of someone, a business, or circumstance is really important in not making us very surprised or taken aback. That actually saves us a lot of pain, essentially, which is understanding the nature of things. In my own life, I've dealt with people who I believe to be more altruistic or kind-hearted or more aligned essentially with my values than in reality they were, right? As a result, I have been very disappointed before. And through these lessons, I've learned that it is really important to understand the nature of people, essentially. That it's okay that, they behave in whatever it is that they do, but it is my job to understand that's just who they are, essentially. And whether or not I choose to continue a relationship or friendship with them, that is really up to me. Well, speaking of misjudging the nature of things, I completely underestimated how quickly the sun is setting today. And so I had to move because otherwise it would have gotten super dark. All right, the next one on the list is Rilke. Rainer Maria Rilke, who existed in basically around the turn of the 20th century, or the 1900s or so. And Letters to a Young Poet was his replies or his exchanges with a would-be poet between 1903 and 1908. And they're quite extraordinary, actually, the amount of effort that he actually put into replying to the inquiries of this young man, who actually was attending the same military academy that he went to. Basically, Rilke was an alumni. Letters to a Young Poet is literally to a young poet wannabe. In it, he talks about a lot about, individualism, what it means to be an artist, what is loneliness, what is aloneness, as well as sadness. And in fact, I learned so much from him about that emotion of sadness. To Rilke, sadness is a harbinger of change. And so many of us tend to just turn away from sadness and try to distract ourselves from it. So for example, if something happens at work, or if we break up with somebody, or get dumped, or some drama happens between friends, or even the passing of a loved one. Often we try to just run away from it. We try to suppress it or drown it out in alcohol, binge eating, drugs, sex, whatever it is, all but to actually face it and to sit with it, actually. So to Rilke, sitting with that sadness, being still with it, and also being alone with it is actually very important, because sadness to him is a messenger of the change that is about to happen. It is a sign that we can no longer stay in the same place. In a similar way, when I broke up with my ex in 2019, I was fundamentally shaken. I was very, very sad. But in previous experiences, I've, as a serial monogamist, I would just go into another relationship right away. And what ended up happening is that I just ended up repeating the same mistakes over and over again. This was the one time that I said, enough is enough. I have to face, whatever it is that is happening that is within me, right? So I sat with the sadness, and I read a lot of Rilke. I listened to a lot of meditations for grounding. So I have both philosophy as well as poetry to help me through that. And it was because of that attentiveness to those emotions and that fearless inquiry into, who I was as a person that really allowed me to make some amazing strides, I would say, in 2020. And the fact that, the world shut down during COVID certainly contributed to that. So I had to sit with it alone, even if I wanted to be around other people. The other thing I learned from Rilke is loving the questions. He says that, there's many things in our lives that we don't really have the answers to. And some things we can research and, all that, or read books. But there are certain questions that are very personal, and even if they were given to us, these answers could, might as well be in a foreign language, or, in a foreign language that we can't read yet, or closed doors that we don't have the keys to yet. So he tells us to love the questions and to live the questions until perhaps one day that we will live into the answers. So I think, this is very true with a lot of my personal experiences, right? So in my youth, for example, people could tell me about, the importance of community or deep friendships. But, having grown up without an extended family, I didn't really know what that meant, right? And it wasn't until most recently that I realized I emotionally understood the importance of community and having those deep connections in my life. But that took a lot of trial and error, a lot of living to get there. A lot of these types of questions, it's important to be patient with them. Again, to love the questions and to live the questions. Finally, there is Thich Nhat Hanh's How to Love. And this is such a small, cute little book where, just really short passages about what it means to love, the nature of love. And it's by the Zen Buddhist monk. And it's got tons of really cool little illustrations as well. It's a quick read, but it's so packed with so much wisdom. And, one of the most important things I learned from it was the true meaning of the Sanskrit word karuna. Karuna is often interpreted as compassion, right? But it's much more than that. It is actually the ability to transform suffering, to understand and transform suffering. And I think this really resonated with me given my emphasis on service, right? As well as leveraging my introverted superpower of deep listening to really understand where people are coming from, the root of their suffering. And from that, use my abilities, to break down complexity, to actually make sense of the world, as well as emotions perhaps as well, to heal and transform that suffering, right? To find, together with them, a way out of that. And I remember most recently that I had a very transformational conversation with my parents. Definitely felt like intergenerational understanding as well as healing. And I came back to my apartment, to my roommate, Brian, And fortunately, I was able to just like kind of convey what just has had happened. Again, sharing is something that I deeply care about. And having heard my story, he was inspired to actually go visit his parents that weekend. And since then, he has really been a model to his extended family, whereas, to the extent that his relatives now see him as the go-to person to, get their sons and daughters, basically his cousins, right, to talk to him. So I think this kind of healing is almost infectious, right? It is able to be passed down from one person to the next. And I think at the core of this is really generous and open understanding, because we really can't help other people until we actually truly understand who they are. And that comes with time, and that comes with generous listening. All right, guys. These are the 4 books that have really changed my life. They have supported me through some tough times. They have contributed immensely to my own personal growth. And I'm very happy and fortunate to be able to share them with you as well. And I know the sun is setting behind me, and it is probably time for me to go cook some dinner. With that, I hope you guys will have a good rest of the day. And yeah, see you guys next time. Bye now.